Hey guys, so just finished doing a custom trigger job to this P-Star engine. I figured I'd make a video letting you guys know that one of the things that Mark does besides, offer Polestar maintenance, installations, all kinds of other services, one of the things he does is trigger jobs. And so I figured I'd give you guys a quick rundown of the types of trigger jobs that you can do. Why have a trigger job in your Polestar? Well, the Polestar has a nice trigger response, and so it's to take full advantage of the Polestar system and just really, you know, upgrade your gun. It's nice to have a nice trigger. So there are three different ways. The simplest and probably the most expensive way is to buy the speed trigger, which is sold at almost all retailers. You can get the silver version and the black version, the flatbow trigger or the tumble trigger, and they have the holes drilled into them. I think Prometheus makes a pretty expensive trigger. It's got like bearings and stuff in it. And what's nice about those is they're tunable. They have a set screw, and you can set the travel of your trigger to exactly the way you want it. And then the problem with that is though they don't fit in all gearboxes or all systems. So slight modification of the trigger is sometimes needed in terms of just shaving down a little bit with some sandpaper or a Dremel. And usually when you set your trigger to the way you want it, usually you have to modify the safety bar in order for the safety to function correctly in your gun after installing the speed trigger. Um, a cheaper, more economical way of doing the trigger job to your gun is some people like to add material to the front of the trigger, the part of the trigger that engages the fire control unit. And what's nice about that is you can just add as much material as you want, and then you can customize the amount of travel that your trigger has, which is pretty cool. The disadvantage to that is once most of the time to achieve the travel or the crispness that people are looking for in the trigger, by the time they've added their material, what it's done is it's taken away the safety function of that gun. And by that I mean there's already a lot of slop in your stock trigger, where it's your Polestar, AEG, whatever. There's usually an amount of play on the trigger when it's on safety. You can still wobble a little bit. And the detriment to this is because there's a little bit of slop in that, once you've added the material, it'll still engage the fire control unit even when it's on safety because there's a little play in the trigger. You can still fire the gun when it's on safety. And so you can either just not add a lot of material or you're not going to have a safety. Because it's a lot easier to take material off than add material. So you can fix that by adding material to the trigger bar, but that can be sometimes tricky. So another way that people like to do it is they put material behind the trigger. And then what that does is that's going to actually see the trigger farther forward, or sorry, farther back, as if you had already started to pull it most of the way, which is cool because it takes away a lot of the trigger travel. You get a real nice crisp trigger. It also increases the tension on the trigger, the poundage, just a tad bit because the spring is already like partially engaged, which is nice. I like that. And then you have to shave down the trigger bar to make the safety function, but that's simple, and you can easily have a functional safety when doing that. Those are the most common ways. What we did with this one is we did a combination of two. We added material to the front of the trigger that engages the fire control unit and behind the trigger. So once we achieved the seatment of the trigger in terms of how much and how far we wanted to seat it back, just a tad, and the correct tension we wanted on the trigger, we then tested it, and we found that we wanted to decrease the travel a little bit still without changing the placement of the trigger, how far back it's seated, and the tension on it. So then we added just a tad bit of material to the front of the trigger where it meets the fire control unit. And then we shaved down the trigger bar. So this is usually a pretty important part because if you take too much material off, it's always easier to take material off than add it back on. And so once you take too much material off, you've disengaged your safety to the point where it doesn't work. And so let me show you how the safety works if you don't know. Engage the safety, that bar comes up, it prevents the trigger from moving. Like I said, usually there's a little bit of play in stock triggers, so usually it can still wobble a little bit. If you don't take enough, or if you don't modify it enough, what can happen is you can engage the safety, and then once you release it, because there's so much tension right there, like the fit is too tight, the safety will stay engaged even when your selector switch is on fire, and then your gun will not work. If you take too much material off, the function of the safety will be null and void. So as you can see, it's modified so that it can freely move. You can freely engage in safety, and at the same time, when safety is engaged, there is no trigger play. There's no wobble in the trigger at all. That's tricky with one hand. There is no play in the trigger at all while on safety, which is nice. So the nice thing about doing this is you can also take away all the slop out of your safety. So there's no play when it's on safety, yet it still moves freely. So the safety function works perfectly. Much improved. And that's the trigger pull that we install. Just enough play to generate. You don't want to put take away too much travel on your trigger, because then you're not going to be able to generate the momentum to get a real fast, clean semi-automatic. It will work great for full auto. When you engage your full auto, if you have no play whatsoever and you just tap it and bah, that's cool. But you don't want to pull your trigger when you don't mean to. So everyone is going to want a different trigger. Not one trigger will work perfectly for everybody. So that's why Mark has different options for you guys, so you guys can have the trigger you want. He can custom fit it so that you get the trigger that you're looking for. And so this is what I wanted, and this is what we set up. Very cool. Alright guys, so if you guys are interested in getting some work done on your P-Star or your engines, or looking to get it installed, whatever you need, just go ahead and hit us up on the Facebook. Tell us what you need and we'll get you in contact with Mark. Peace.